In the September of 2012, a large angry crowd, made up of residents of Yinga, a small town located 80 kilometers to the east of the Yunnan province city Kulig, gathered expectantly in the streets. They were waiting for the arrival of two men charged with committing possibly the most brutal crime the small community had experienced. Word spread around Yinga that the men were going to be taken to the scene of their crime, to walk investigators through how they ended the lives of two of the town's residents, and the waiting crowd was growing increasingly restless. Fearing the possibility of the crowd deciding to extract their own form of vigilante justice against the suspects, SWAT police arrived in the town to provide a safe corridor for the individuals responsible for a 9-day rampage across the provinces of Hunan, Guangdong, and Yunnan, which cost the lives of 7 people. When they finally arrived in the town, the waiting crowd was further angered when they saw the suspects, handcuffed and shackled at the ankles, had their faces covered with balaclavas to protect their identities. The reason for hiding the suspects' faces would later emerge once they found themselves officially charged for their crimes, and while the details of the rampage were shocking enough, the public were further stunned to learn the accused were 2 teenagers barely out of high school, Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli. The investigation into the 2 young men began August 21, 2012, almost 1,000 kilometers to the east, in Wugang, the county-level city falling under the management of the Hunan province city Shaoyang. The previous day, Fu Zhenli had returned to the area for the first time in several months, and met up with his currently destitute former classmate. They wanted to get rich quick, and saw turning to crime as the easiest way to do so. After meeting, they traveled out to the small town of Wentouqiao, located 16 kilometers to the north, intending to break into someone's house and rob them. The two eventually picked out the rather run-down home of elderly carpenter Zhang Yuehong and his deaf wife Liu Xuemei in the village of Chaoyang. Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli picked out the dilapidated house because they felt like the people living there would likely be in their advanced years, and thus less capable of putting up a fight. Small villages were very close-knit communities, made up largely of families who'd been living in the area for generations. As such, people didn't pay much attention to the security of their homes, and doors were frequently left open during the day. Armed with knives, Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli entered the home of the carpenter and his wife, demanding Zhang Yuehong hand over all the money he had in the home. The carpenter angrily rebuked the 2 high school dropouts, telling them to go ahead and search because he had no money to give them. Threatening the elderly couple with their knives, they bound Zhang Yuehong and Liu Xuemei to chairs, with the carpenter continuing to insult the home invaders throughout. He told them they must be especially stupid if they thought he had anything worth stealing, given how run-down their house was. Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli ignored the man and ransacked the home, but all they managed to find was 1,000 yuan, around $140 in cash, 3 cartons of cigarettes and an old cell phone. Realizing the carpenter was telling the truth about having little to steal, the 2 home invaders then discussed what to do with their victims. The younger of the 2, Fu Zhenli, was seemingly concerned the couple would immediately report them to the police after they fled the scene, so suggested it was safer to leave no witnesses. Liu Qizhi seemed to agree and began the attack, injuring Zhang Yuehong multiple times with his knife, while Fu Zhenli did the same to Liu Xuemei. Before leaving the scene, the 2 home invaders found one more item of value worth taking, the motorcycle of Zhang Yuehong, worth 800 yuan, around $114, which they stole and rode back to the city. Once in Wugang, they managed to sell the motorcycle, then bought 2 tickets for a bus heading to the Guangdong province city Dongguan, almost 700 kilometers to the south, where they soon began looking for another target to rob. Liu Qizhi was 18 and effectively homeless at the time of the home invasion. When he made the sudden decision to turn to a life of crime, he was supposed to be attending summer cram classes, preparing him for another year of high school, and sitting the Gaokao, the Chinese college entrance exam. Like many young people from rural areas in China, his parents had placed an enormous amount of emphasis on the importance of going to university, and were prepared to make sacrifices to ensure their son got the best education they could afford. Practically all their earnings went into paying the tuition fees for his education, viewing it as an investment for the future. The concept of xiaodao, meaning filial piety, is an important aspect of Chinese culture, with children expected and legally required to support their parents once they start working themselves. For those who reside in the poorer rural areas, it's especially important, as many people have little in the way of a pension to live off when they reach retirement age. Their children getting a good education, then going on to attend university was seen as a guarantee of them earning a high salary, meaning they would have enough to raise their own families while still taking care of the parents. Liu Qizhi was a distinctly average student during middle school, so when efforts to help their son, his parents scraped together enough money to send him to an expensive private high school, believing that spending more would lead to improved test scores. The schooling cost around 10,000 yuan, almost $1,400 every semester, his parents making many sacrifices to afford it. However, the extra expense failed to have the desired effect. The workload and pressure students face when starting high school and studying for the Gaokao increases dramatically, often having classes 6 days a week, beginning around 7:30 in the morning, and ending around 10 or 10:30 in the night. Liu Qizhi had the added pressure of his parents spending more than they could comfortably afford for the private school, and that only grew when his grades failed to improve. He found himself frequently in conflict with teachers, sleeping during classes, and not finishing homework assignments. More issues emerged when it was time to choose his elective classes. With ambitions to become an illustrator, he wanted to study art, but his parents felt there was no future following that career path, and forced him to choose other subjects. The pressure seemingly became too much for Liu Qizhi, and he began sneaking out of school and going to internet bars to play online games, returning to the school dormitory in the early hours of the morning. He was eventually caught and suspended for the remainder of the semester, just before he was set to sit the Gaokao. Naturally, his parents were furious, but Liu Qizhi promised to do better during the final year if he was allowed to study art, and said he'd work through the summer if he could attend the cram school, enabling him to catch up with other students. Eventually his parents agreed, and borrowed the 20,000 yuan, almost $3,000 needed for the classes. However, once again spending more money than they could truly afford didn't have the desired effect. Very quickly Liu Qizhi drew the art teacher's ire, eventually leading to Liu Qizhi being told to get on his knees and apologize for his lack of effort in front of the entire class. The humiliation led to Liu Qizhi deciding to give up on education, and not wanting to face his parents, he stole 800 yuan, around $114 from them, and ran away from home. He spent most of his time playing online games in internet bars, but the money he took from his parents soon began to dwindle. To ensure he could continue using the computers, he was prepared to go without food, sometimes only eating the leftover snacks other people using the internet bars left behind. Then in mid-August he reconnected on social media with his old school friend who'd also given up on education, Fu Zhenli. Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli arrived in Dongguan on August 23, 2012, only 2 days after the robbery in Hunan. They rented a cheap room in the Wenjiang district of the city, and quickly started looking for potential targets to rob. The pair had been somewhat disappointed with their haul from the previous deadly home invasion, and felt they could earn much more in Dongguan. Dongguan was an industrial city known for its manufacturing base, along with its thriving escort and adult entertainment services, which both attracted wealthy businessmen to the city. However, they only wanted to choose people they felt would be unlikely to fight back, so after a couple of days wandering around the city looking for potential targets, they eventually decided to rob the landlady of the guest house they were using. On August 25th, they convinced the landlady, referred to with the pseudonym Tan Mo, to come to the room they were renting, telling her there was an issue with the water heater. On entering the room, she immediately found herself being held at knife point and was tied up. Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli demanded to know where she kept any cash on the premises. While one kept watch over the hostage, the other went to the landlady's room to look for the money. He returned with 3,000 yuan, a little over $400 in cash, along with the landlady's banking passbook, bank and identity cards. Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli demanded she give them the PIN number to the bank card, but Tan Mo refused to tell them. In response, they both attacked Tan Mo with their knives, ending her life. They then hid the body in the bathroom, and waited for her husband to return home. At around 9 in the evening, the husband, referred to with the pseudonym Wu Mo, arrived at the guest house and was greeted by the two young tenants. They informed him they wanted to change rooms as there was an issue with the one they were currently using, and got him to come to the room. As he walked inside, he immediately spotted the blood on the floor and asked what had happened, only to find Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli holding their knives towards him. Like his wife hours earlier, Wu Mo was tied up and held at knife point. The young man rifled through his pockets, took out his wallet, and again demanded the bank card's PIN number. One of them then went to check the number was correct at a nearby ATM, and returned with the money he managed to withdraw. Satisfied with their success, Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli then attacked Wu Mo in much the same manner they had with the man's wife, and ended his life. Having added 2 more victims to their tally, and getting their hands on a decent amount of cash, they decided it was time to move on, and boarded a bus heading to the Yunnan province city Kunming, almost 1,500 kilometers to the west. Slightly younger than Liu Qizhi, Fu Zhenli quit education the year prior to his friend, after finding himself frequently in trouble for fighting with other students. A poor student, he paid little attention during classes, and only cared about getting money so he could spend time playing online games. He was being raised by his mother in Wugang, while his father was running a small business in the Guangdong province city Guangzhou, so when he said he didn't want to attend school anymore, his parents tried to teach him the value of money in education. He was sent to Guangzhou to work for his father's company, but didn't get an easy ride thanks to his status of being the boss's son. Instead, he was treated like any other employee, having to work long hours for low pay, his parents hoping he'd come to realize earning money was hard. However, the lesson his parents were attempting to teach him failed to produce the intended results. Rather than coming to the conclusion that getting an education could help him get a decent job and salary in the future, as his parents hoped, Fu Zhenli decided he'd rather look for easier ways to get rich, and do so quickly. During his time in Guangdong, he became a massive fan of Hong Kong crime movies, and idolized the gangster characters so much he began speaking with the Hong Kong accent. When he reconnected with Liu Qizhi online, he spoke constantly about committing crimes to make money. In the first conversation they had, he asked Liu Qizhi if he'd picked out any targets during the time since running away from home. Confused, Liu Qizhi asked what he meant, with Fu Zhenli saying if they wanted to make money, they had to be brave enough to do big things like robberies and ending people's lives, without any feelings of guilt. The decision to head to Yunnan after leaving Dongguan wasn't a random choice. They intended to head to the border the province shared with Vietnam, Laos and Myanmar, with plans to make big money. From his time watching the Hong Kong crime movies, Fu Zhenli had learned about the Golden Triangle area, which included Thailand, and wanted to join the drug cartels operating in the region, producing and trafficking opium. As the bus made its way to Yunnan, Liu Qizhi was still posting on his QQ social media account, telling his friends what he'd done, and saying he didn't know if he was able to stop. The pair arrived in Kunming on August 27, 2012, and the following day boarded another bus heading to Fuyang County in neighboring Qujing City, 200 kilometers to the northeast, fully intent on committing more robberies before making their way to the border. Around the time Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli arrived in Yunnan, back in Hunan, the bodies of Zhang Yuehong and Liu Xuemei were discovered by concerned family members. After having no contact with the carpenter and his wife for 3 days, the relatives, who lived in a different area of Shaoyang, visited the village to check on them. On discovery of the bodies, police were called and the investigation got underway. However, it very quickly became apparent that it was going to be a somewhat difficult case to crack. While the home had very obviously been ransacked, pointing to the motive being robbery, the rundown state of the crime scene made finding forensic evidence, like finger or footprints, an almost impossible task. Furthermore, witness statements from neighbors said they hadn't heard or seen anything or anyone suspicious, leaving police with little to go on. Given the out-of-way nature of the crime scene, the investigating officers felt that the perpetrators were likely local and familiar with the area, so they focused the investigation on the village residents and those residing in other neighboring villages. While that investigation was taking place, police in Dongguan had also opened an investigation after residents of the guest house discovered the bodies of Tan Mo and Wu Mo. This time police would find forensic evidence left at the crime scene, and crucially got images of the two suspects after they were caught on the building's security cameras when registering. However, while hotels are legally required to check guests' identity cards, smaller cheap guest houses often ignored the regulation. The clientele of accommodation like this were largely people who either weren't keen on their names being put on official records or were paying for the room by the hour with female company. The Dongguan team soon found that the names the two suspects used to register were fake, leaving them with an uphill task in identifying the perpetrators. Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli reached Fuyuan County on August 28, getting off the bus in the town of Dahe. They headed towards a local tourist destination, Fuyuan Ying, known for its waterfall hidden in the hills, but on the way spotted an isolated home in the village of Changping. The home belonged to the chairperson of the local village committee, Tang Yunfen, and appeared to have been recently constructed, suggesting to Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli the owner had money. They watched the house from a distance for a time, looking to see how many people were living there, but only saw Tang Yunfen moving around. To make sure the woman was home by herself, they stealthily approached the building and began listening for voices coming from behind the doors. Satisfied no one else was around, they forced their way into the home and held the woman at knife point when she confronted them. They then bound her and demanded to know where she kept her money. Tang Yunfen responded by saying they could search the home all they wanted, but she didn't have any cash on the premises. Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli took turns looking in different rooms of the home, but all they found was 90 yuan, just 12 USD. Angered that there was so little of value to steal, and not wanting Tang Yunfen to report them to the police after leaving the scene, they choked the woman until she was no longer breathing. They then headed south, reaching the town of Yingshang, just 12 kilometers away, and checked into a cheap guest house run by the 5 months pregnant Wu Guiying. Given the money they got from the guest house in Dongguan, they took little time with making the decision to target Wu Guiying when they had an opportunity to get her alone. The day after checking in, August 30th, Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli went to see the landlady and told her there was an issue with the room. The guest house was a family business managed by Wu Guiying and her mother-in-law, Liu Xiaofeng. With the school summer holidays coming to an end, business had slowed and they had few guests at the time. Liu Xiaofeng had gone out to run some errands, leaving Wu Guiying looking after the guest house, while also taking care of her young daughter, referred to with the pseudonym Xiaowu. With no one else to watch the child, Wu Guiying took her daughter with her as she went to investigate the issue with her guest's room. Once she walked inside, Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli pointed her in the direction of the supposed problem, and Wu Guiying placed Xiaowu on one of the room's beds. When her back was turned, she was attacked and received multiple knife wounds from both Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli, which proved to be fatal. Xiaowu soon began crying, so the two young men covered the toddler with the heavy quilts prepared for winter from both beds, and pushed down until the crying stopped. They then went to the landlady's apartment and began searching for money and other valuables worth taking. However, all they managed to find was 1,000 yuan, around 140 USD in cash, a cell phone worth around 500 yuan, and a jade pendant worth 220 yuan, around 30 USD. Liu Xiaofeng was returning to the guest house having completed her morning errands. As she approached the building, she spotted the two young men, recognizing them as guests, walking out the front door carrying bags. When the men noticed her looking at them, they quickly began sprinting into the town and out of sight. Thinking the guests were leaving without paying the bill, Liu Xiaofeng quickened her pace to the building, and immediately noticed Wu Guiying wasn't manning the front desk. She went to look in their personal room and saw it had been searched, but there was still no sign of her daughter-in-law or granddaughter. Getting increasingly concerned, Liu Xiaofeng began making her way up the building, checking each room on the different floors, not finding any sign of her relatives. When she reached the third floor, she entered room 301 and saw the body of Wu Guiying covered with one of the bed's quilts, and the foot of her motionless granddaughter poking out from under the other quilt. Liu Xiaofeng ran out into the street screaming for help, and the police were called to the scene. Once Liu Xiaofeng calmed enough to speak with responding officers, she managed to tell them about the two guests she saw leaving the guest house. So while an investigation team started examining the scene, other officers began searching the town. In her distraught condition, Liu Xiaofeng could only give officers a basic description of the two suspects, but the hotel had security cameras which could give images of the people police were hunting. However, Liu Xiaofeng never used the computer and didn't know the password to log in, so officers needed to wait for other family members to arrive and give them access. In the meantime, police set up checkpoints on all major roads around the area, and technicians in the town's main police station pored over CCTV footage. Two male individuals carrying bags were spotted running along the streets, coming from the direction of the hotel and entering an internet bar. Police were sent to the location and checked the business's security cameras. Officers watched two young men enter the internet bar and head straight to the toilets, without making any attempt to use the computers. Moments later, the same individuals reappeared carrying fewer bags than when they walked in, and wearing a change of clothes. Officers went to check the toilets and found the bag the suspects left behind. At the guest house, police had managed to access the computer and look at the security camera footage. They also had two names from the suspect's registration. The guests registered with the names Liu Qingnan and Tang Shaofeng. However, when checking the names against the population registry, there were no matches for either name. The search of the crime scene itself had turned up plenty of evidence to help convict the suspects once they were caught. Fingerprints were found on various items that had been rummaged through in the apartment the family used as their home, and bloody shoe prints were taken from the room the bodies were discovered. The shoe prints, along with cigarette butts littering the crime scene floor, would leave police with little doubt that the two men seen entering the internet bar were the people they were looking for. A search of the bag left in the internet bar's toilets turned up two pairs of blood-stained sneakers, the soles of which appeared to match the shoe prints found, and empty cigarette packets discovered in the bag were the same brand that were left in the guest house room. Officers attempting to track the suspects' movements through the town found further evidence at a small disused building. A plastic bag had been left there, and on searching it, police found a knife that looked like it had been recently cleaned, and the banking passbooks belonging to three different people. A quick search of the names on the passbooks showed that one belonged to an individual named Tang Yunfen, who lived in the neighboring town, the others to people from Dongguan and Shaoyang. With the suspects seemingly being responsible for already having taken the lives of two people, there were serious concerns about the safety of Tang Yunfen, so officers were dispatched to her home. When they got to the location, officers were immediately concerned that there was no sign of Tang Yunfen, and attempts to contact her went unanswered. Looking through the windows, the officers saw the disorganized state of the home, which immediately set off alarm bells, so they forced the door open and entered. Searching the home, there was no sign of Tang Yunfen. That was until the officers eventually found her body, stuffed under her bed, still tied up. With the suspects appearing now to have claimed the lives of three people, the investigation team, using the other banking passbooks, quickly connected their own case to those in both Dongguan and Wugang, which pointed to the suspects having 7 victims across 3 provinces in the space of 9 days. Thus far, the police in Yinga had managed to track the 2 suspects to the town's bus station, where security camera footage caught them buying tickets only minutes after leaving the internet bar. However, by the time the investigation team had the footage from the bus station's security cameras, the suspects had already boarded the bus and left the area, with police believing they were heading to Kulig. Bus station staff confirmed this when shown images of the suspects taken while they were purchasing tickets, but as it was only considered a local bus, the wanted men weren't required to show their identity cards, and so ultimately police lost track of them. Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli had both panicked when they saw that Liu Xiaofeng spotted them leaving the guest house and knew they needed to get out of town quickly. They ducked into the internet bar and quickly changed their clothes and bloodstained shoes, took the cash they had, but left behind anything that could link them to the crime scene. Once at the bus station, they bought tickets for the first bus leaving the area and arrived in Kulig. Not wasting any time, they then boarded another bus, this time bound for Shenzhen, in Guangdong Province, 1,400 kilometers to the southeast. Arriving in the city, they checked into a cheap hotel thinking about striking again, but changed their minds a few days later when they saw an arrest warrant issued nationwide for 2 male teens traveling together. They made the decision to split up, thinking it would make it more difficult for police to find them, with Liu Qizhi choosing to stay in Shenzhen, and Fu Zhenli saying he would make his way to Shanghai. They divided the stolen money equally between them, and Fu Zhenli left the city, while Liu Qizhi kept a low profile, rarely leaving the hotel room. While the fugitives were making their way to Shenzhen, the investigation team in Yinga had everything they needed to make an arrest, except the names of the suspects. However, they made a breakthrough when searching one of the bags left in the internet bar's toilets. Tucked away deep inside a hidden pocket, police found a plastic wallet with a phone number written on it. The SIM card the number belonged to was registered to an individual named Fu Zhenli, who fell into what police believed was the right age range for the suspects. Police showed Liu Xiaofeng an image of Fu Zhenli from a record of his identity card, and despite the photo showing the suspect at a younger age, she was sure it was the same person. The investigation team contacted the suspect's parents, and were told by his mother and father they hadn't seen him for several days, both saying he'd gone to meet an old school friend, but they didn't know the person's name. On September 6, 2012, the investigation team received word that Fu Zhenli had been arrested in Jiangxi province while attempting to buy a train ticket to Shanghai. Being interrogated by the police in Jiangxi, he quickly gave them the name of his partner as Liu Qizhi, and told officers the location of the hotel they were staying when they decided to split up. Police in Shenzhen were contacted to make the arrest, and on the evening of September 6, they visited the guest house. They showed staff images of Liu Qizhi, and they confirmed the suspect was still renting the room, for which he used another false name to register.
叫什么名字？叫什么名字？进去。我这刘几次啊？别动，叫刘启志是吧？湖南上等武钢的吧？知道吧？知道为什么抓你吧？
Officers stormed the room and quickly got the suspect under control. Once he confirmed his name was actually Liu Qizhi, along with his hometown, he was placed under arrest and transported to the nearest police station. With both Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli now in custody, they were transported back to Kulig to face interrogation. The two confessed to their crimes, shocking officers with how casually they recounted the details of their actions, speaking with little emotion and showing no remorse. Fu Zhenli attempted to place more blame onto the shoulders of Liu Qizhi for the 7 people losing their lives, claiming he only intended to rob the victims and didn't want to hurt anyone. He told the officers he was worried Liu Qizhi would turn against him if he didn't follow his partner's orders. Liu Qizhi, however, claimed Fu Zhenli was the one who suggested taking the lives of Zhang Yuehong and Liu Xuemei in their first robbery, but added that since they were already facing the death penalty if caught, there was no point holding back in the subsequent robberies. Shortly after giving their confessions, Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli were transported back to Yinga to revisit the crime scene and walk officers through the incident. Word of the people responsible for taking the lives of the pregnant Wu Guiying and her 2-year-old daughter Xiao Wu returning was leaked to the town's residents, and the angry crowd gathered to greet them. However, even hearing the crowd baying for their blood had little impact on the 2 teens, and they continued to show no remorse or guilt for what they'd done. Due to their age, the trial was delayed for several months, while a psychologist assessed the mental competency of both Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli. There was also an interest in trying to understand what caused the 2 high school dropouts to carry out such a violent rampage across the country. Neither Liu Qizhi nor Fu Zhenli had a prior criminal record, and while Fu Zhenli had been known to get into fights during his school days, Liu Qizhi was viewed as a somewhat timid and weak individual by his peers. Liu Qizhi told the psychologist those aspects of his personality made it difficult for him to get along with his classmates once he began high school. The students he attempted to befriend were the more rebellious types, who, like Fu Zhenli, sometimes got into fights with others. When the brawls between rival groups broke out, his friends told Liu Qizhi to get involved, but he always found himself too scared to act.
那个私立学校嘛，同学们说的难听点，那个素质都比较低，喜欢打架，喊我去打，就我从来都没有打过架，我也不会去打别人。
Fu Zhenli, on the other hand, enjoyed having the reputation of being a fighter, and even carved the Chinese character for wolf into his own arm.
从什么时候开始打架的？
初中时候比较少，高中的时候比较多嘛。
那这上两年学打了多少回架？
几十回啊。
那我看你手上的这刻的什么呀？这是狼什么呀？狼影。
Fu Zhenli spoke about his personal motivation for the crimes being purely about getting money, feeling he was nothing without it, while Liu Qizhi said he'd become increasingly nihilistic in his outlook on life. His failure to perform well at school, and the disappointment it brought to his parents left him feeling worthless, and that his life had no meaning. Throughout the interviews they gave, the pair largely fell silent when asked about their feelings when they took the lives of their victims. Fu Zhenli notably refused to talk about that particular aspect of their crimes, and Liu Qizhi claimed he entered a sort of dissociative state, saying it was like he was playing a computer game. Something that became apparent during the interviews was that the younger of the two, Fu Zhenli, had the more dominant personality in the partnership.
当时就想着要杀人是吗？
是。
你们当时杀人的时候，对方有没有求饶、恐惧什么东西？
有。
对方都开始求饶了，你们怎么还下手？
我觉得也没退路，还是一错再错。
He came across as harder and colder when answering questions, while Liu Qizhi appeared almost happy someone was finally listening to him talk about his feelings.
叔叔，你告诉我是不是在做梦？是不是在做梦？
如果说现在都是在梦里面的话，你喜欢梦醒来之后是什么样的？
不是如果，是真的，真的在做梦。
你是真的在做梦。
On April 17, 2013, Liu Qizhi and Fu Zhenli appeared in court and were found guilty of 7 counts of intentional homicide, along with other charges of robbery. Before the sentences were announced, Liu Qizhi pleaded for mercy and the opportunity to have another chance at life, so that in the future he could look after his parents, who refused to attend the trial. The desperate pleas fell on deaf ears and he was sentenced to death. Fu Zhenli remained silent throughout most of the proceedings, and was handed a life sentence. As he was a few months shy of his 18th birthday during the 9-day rampage, he was still considered a minor when committing the crimes, and therefore not eligible to receive the death penalty. There was no apology offered to the families of the victims, or any genuine display of regret shown by either convicted man during the trial. It wasn't until Liu Qizhi gave one last interview before his punishment was carried out that he finally showed some level of remorse.
叔叔，我怕死，我怕，我不是个男生。
但是你想想，别人也怕死，那7个人也怕死，结果那7个人被你们给杀死了。
我们也怕死，我也怕死，我们都怕死。然后被我杀死了，所以我该死。
While admitting he was scared and didn't want his own life to end, he had taken the lives of others, and so he believed he deserved his punishment.
你也知道判死刑是意味着什么吗？
死了就行了，死了就行了。你说对不对？
On February 13, 2015, Liu Qizhi appeared in court to be told his punishment was going to be carried out. In a final attempt to in some way atone for the crimes he committed, he requested his organs be donated after his passing. However, while the courts accepted his request, his parents later refused to allow it. Once the court proceedings were over, Liu Qizhi was taken away and executed by lethal injection. Fu Zhenli remains jailed to this day, and while people given life sentences often see their punishment commuted, given the severity of his crimes, for Fu Zhenli, that is highly unlikely, and he looks set to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. And hope to see you again for the next dark tale from the Middle Kingdom.